Hello, everyone. It's Ari Honeyford with the Awkwardly Zen podcast, and I am super excited to introduce you to one of our newest partners and practitioners with Awkwardly Zen. This is Ryan Lanham, and Ryan's focus is mostly gene keys. I know there's some astrology in there. I'm sure we'll talk about that. So, Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And so, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, where you are, what it is that you do, and then we'll dig in a little further.
Okay, I'm in Niwot, Colorado right now, just north of Boulder a little bit, and I have the title, the I came up for myself, Cosmic Coach
Love it.
and Gene Keys Guide. So I'm certified as a Gene Keys Guide, and then I've been studying astrology for a number of years. And oftentimes, what I do with clients is we'll look at both lenses, both astrology and gene keys, and sort of see how the heavens were mapped onto their DNA at birth. And we'll work out some ideas about how to move through some difficulties in life towards life purpose, that kind of thing. And so for me, um, it's one of those things where the gene keys kind of fell in my lap a few years ago. I was at a crossroads in life after going back to grad school at CSU and getting a master's in fine arts and creative writing, and wrote a couple memoirs and was working with veterans doing writing stuff. And that had been a great sort of career, a great educational background. But there was this inner calling for something else. And so I was graduating, and there was nothing really on the horizon that had to do with writing. And so I just sent up a prayer to the universe one day saying, what is my life purpose? Like, what am I here to do? I've done a bunch of things, but like, what is my purpose? And I went to an art show the next day in Boulder, and this lady tapped me on the shoulder. I'd met her once before, but she said, have you heard of the Gene Keys? I said, no, what's that? She said, it helps you discover your life purpose. So it was like this white light moment. And then from there, it was a new trajectory shift, doing this now as a calling.
I love that. I know Gene Keys is kind of a hard thing to put in a nutshell, but would you try for those folks who maybe have not heard about it yet to tell a little bit about what Gene Keys are are and maybe a little bit about how it can help people with their life path.
Sure. So the gene keys, like human design or astrology, you go to a website and you enter your birth information, and then you get a profile that pops up with your specific spheres, is what they're called here. The gene keys are in spheres. And what I've heard them described, and I like this, as it's our personal algorithm for awakening. And so, we have genetic codes within us. The DNA is codes. This is sort of like archetypal patterns that are keys to awakening. And awakening in this sense is really through the heart opening. And the heart, well, to get to the open heart, there's a lot of shadow work. And so the gene keys sort of articulate these 11 archetypal patterns that we have. And they're described in a book and in some audio. And then what we do is we sort of contemplate, and I can go more into specifics of how these show up in a minute, but we contemplate how these patterns show up in our life. And through awareness, particularly of the shadow patterns, they begin to shift. So a lot of times we just move through life and we have these shadow patterns and we feel a discomfort, or we feel a numbness, or we feel some, underlying energy that's unpleasant, but we may not be able to put our finger on it. So what the gene keys help us do is put our finger on it. And with that, transformation begins to happen. We heal some of these patterns. Some of them go back to childhood. Some of them are karmic, bloodline, collective. And when that happens, the heart opens more. And from the gene keys perspective, when the heart opens, then our unique genius, our path to service for the whole, our path to prosperity opens up organically, and life begins to flourish in new ways.
I love that. And you consider yourself a guide with this, which I would absolutely agree from everything I've heard from you. How do you go about doing that? I know you have a meetup group, so tell us a little bit about that and kind of what that process is, if you would.
Yeah, and guide is actually the Gene Keys official term because there's a process that you go through to become certified in that. And so we're Gene Keys guides, and the distinction they make, which is kind of interesting, and I get now that I'm in it, is that unlike astrology, where you're often giving readings and seeing, you look at somebody's chart, you see certain patterns, and you tell them, and that can be very helpful to have that explained like that. Or same with going to a psychic or a tarot reader. I've had some of my biggest life transitions have come from seeing a psychic and having them tell me something that I could not see and that it's changed my entire trajectory. With the Gene Keys, it's a little bit different. And that was, as a guide, it took a little bit of adjusting to figure out how to navigate that because I was used to people coming to me for astrology reading, which is largely me talking for an hour or an hour and a half or whatever, telling them what I see, having some back and forth dialogue. But with the Gene Keys, it is a path of self-discovery and self-illumination. And so the the wisdom stream that this transmission is, it comes alive within us. And so that can be a little bit of a pivot point for people who are used to, myself included, going to somebody and wanting some answers.
Right.
When like, tell me what's going on, tell me what my chart means, that kind of thing. And so when I first got into the guides program, even though they kind of discourage giving readings, it was hard not to try to say what I saw in the chart.
Right.
So I started a meetup group a couple years ago, and it's an all levels group, and we meet in person and online. And so I would just invite people in public, and they would come in with their own charts and sort of talk about what they were contemplating wherever they're at in their journey. And what I noticed was that people would arrive and suddenly have their own insights. Or in the group setting, something somebody else is saying, especially if we're working on the same part of the chart,
Mm-hmm.
can trigger some insight within us about our own sequence. And so the sort of aha moment for me was realizing that when people arrive at their own organic insight, it is much more powerful than me saying what I see in a chart. And this is something I've talked about with other teachers too, because I've taught as well.
Yeah.
Um, like when you get up in front of a class and you're just telling information all the time to students, it doesn't always land all the way until they are either quizzed or asked to teach themselves. So when people start teaching you about their own chart, you find that they start learning it in deeper ways. So as a guide, it's really about holding the space for an individual to move through this process. And then a big part of it too is coaching on how to contemplate, because the Gene Keys, it is the art of contemplation. Like Richard Rudd, the founder of the Gene Keys, he also wrote a book called The Art of Contemplation. And in it, he really explains how to do this ancient art of self-discovery. And it's one of these things that we all have within us, this
Mm-hmm.
ability, but maybe it's like a muscle that hasn't been exercised very often. And once we do start to get into our own innate wisdom stream, these Gene Keys just open up and we see how they apply to different areas of our life. And through that awareness, transformation begins to happen in really profound ways.
Wow. And I was lucky enough to sit down with you and you kind of walked through that with me. We vet everyone who is a partner with Awkwardly Zen, and it was a fun conversation to have with you because you had to tweak it a little bit to actually be vetted because the process is or can be pretty long. So you have kind of a shorter form that you interact with folks, but then can you tell us a little bit about what sometimes happens with those people who really want to dig in to their gene keys?
Yeah. So I like doing the one-on-one coaching with folks, and some people are really self-motivated and like to pursue this path on their own and like to go at their own pace and like to go through the material intuitively, which is sort of how I was in the beginning.
Right.
Because there's a big Gene Keys book that's like a phone book that has all 64 of the Gene Keys. And for me, I just wanted to move through that whole book intuitively. Didn't really matter if it aligned with my chart. I just wanted all of the information. I wanted to see the full lay of the land first. And then what sort of happens is that we either feel called or we start following the outline path of what the gene keys suggest. And it's broken down into 3 different sequences moving through your chart. So there's
Mhm.
an activation sequence, which is about purpose, a Venus sequence, which is about love and relationships, and then a Pearl sequence, which is about prosperity. And I can't recommend enough the official courses on the Gene Keys website. They have everything mapped out with modules and videos and meditations. And so usually what I do is, or what has happened just naturally, it's not even, it feels like the universe kind of like puts these things together, is
Right.
that a group of us will form through meetup, and then we'll all like congeal and cohere and come together where everybody is ready to pursue one of these sequences. And so then when that happens, we take the group from being public to private, and we'll move through the official course together, and we'll also meet once a week, either in person or on Zoom. There, I come up with additional little journaling things if that's helpful for people, and then provide outside resources, because some of the shadow work, particularly when you get into like the childhood stuff or the somatic emotional things, it's helpful to refer out if someone needs help from a body worker, or if they need Reiki or biofield tuning or massage or rolfing or acupuncture, breath work, sound healing. Like all those things were a big part of my journey, and I see how they all fit with this healing work, because the gene keys, it's a lot of information. So the way it opens up initially is intellectually. It feels like a cerebral entrance into the healing path. But as we go into deeper layers of wounding, it becomes more embodied, the stuff that we're moving through, which usually benefits from having other practitioners, other modalities coming in to help move that energy. So as a group, what we do is we move through the sequence, whether a 12-week sequence for 12-week group for a shorter sequence, or a 6-month sequence for like the Venus sequence, which is a deep dive into all of our childhood patterning. And the group experience is just, it's amazing. It's fun, one, to watch people go through some of this transition and watch their heart open.
Yeah.
And then two, because we meet once a week, it's like it becomes a community, almost
Right.
a family. And doing this deep work and sharing and expressing vulnerably and authentically is in itself a healing process. And it gives us a template for how we can carry that same authenticity out into the world, out into our other groups, and be that beacon of light, if you want to think about it like that.
Yeah, I love that, Ryan. It makes me think of even in a much smaller scale in Awkwardly Zen when we have our Zen Zooms. And one of the things I love about our Zen Zooms is that sense of community that comes from being able to be in a space where multiple people are holding space for one another and are not going to look at you weird if you say the weird thing, right? Because they're going through the exact same weird thing or something else that feels even weirder. So I do think that there is so much healing within that group dynamic. So I love that you offer that for people. One of the things you brought up was your own personal journey, and your journey is very unique, for sure. You mentioned veterans, and I know that's near and dear to your heart, and teaching. And so, can you just give a little bit of a background? Because I think sometimes in spirituality, there's this idea that there's a whole bunch of people who are coming in and they've always been woo woo and they've always had this mindset, but you've done some different careers for sure.
Yeah, I'm full on woo woo now.
I know, and
Um,
we love it.
probably didn't start like that. No, I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, to a traditional family, that sort of thing. Religion was a big part of our family growing up. My dad, he was a preacher. And so it was one of these things that was present, focal point within the family growing up. For me, though, what I think the way I experienced that was it maybe narrowed my mindset or my paradigm, maybe kind of created a box for the way I thought about things for a number of years, conservative family growing up and that sort of thing. Um, and then in high school, I met my first love. And it was a very sort of tender love. And when we broke up, I wasn't sure how to deal with that pain. And so I tried drinking for the first time. And I have that X factor of alcoholism or whatever it is, where I was addicted from day one. And so rather than deal with my pain head on, I began to numb and escape. And it sort of took on a life of its own. I mean, it did, absolutely did. And so my dark night of the soul was a sort of protracted 15-year period where I drugs, alcohol, homelessness, like all of these really dark expressions of humanity. And I joined like sort of at my wit's end, didn't know what to do. At 27, I joined the Army as an infantryman. And the thing is, I'd always kind of been anti-military growing up because I just didn't like being told what to do. And my dad had been military and his dad was military. And whenever I needed direction and discipline in my life, my dad would sometimes say, like, why don't you join the military? Like, do something. And I'm like, I don't need it. I was in denial. And actually, denial is my core wound in my gene keys chart. So it's taken me some time to really grasp how prevalent that is. But I joined the Army, deployed to Afghanistan, experienced war and all the darkness and chaos that comes with that. Got out, was struggling still at 31, and I tried to take my own life. So I drank a bottle of roach killer, and what felt like a miracle, woke up the next day and I actually felt fine. I felt so, but what it did, hitting that rock bottom, was I decided to do the hardest thing that I'd done up to that point, and that was pick up the heaviest phone in my life and call my mom and ask for help. And my parents helped me come to Colorado, which is where I am now and have been since, and go to rehab and get sober. So I've been sober for almost 13 years now and was able to go back to school, get my undergrad at CU and then grad school at CSU. And then I started at that point to really turn my attention to being of service outwardly. I had so much help on the recovery journey, from all kinds of therapies, going to Peru to take ayahuasca, to EMDR, cognitive behavioral, PTSD groups, like the whole, felt like everything, the shotgun blast approach where you try everything, see what sticks, and had so much healing from all that stuff that I felt called to do that as well. So I started a veterans writing group in Fort Collins, and we produced a journal, Charlie Mike, and this is still a program that's going on now, where veterans would come and share and open up. Many of them Vietnam vets who'd never shared in 50 years were now putting their stories onto the page, and then we're printing it and putting it in books, and they would read it in public, and it all felt really beautiful and healing. I also worked with at-risk youth, and then I volunteered for a couple of years with the Alliance for Suicide Prevention, because that had been something that had a big impact on me. And actually just this week have been asked to come speak to other organizations about suicide prevention. And so I haven't done this in a number of years, but it feels good to be asked to do this again now that I have this other shadow work sort of understanding, where I can bring that into and also maybe help coach people through the process of how to engage with a person who's going through that kind of darkness. And there's still certifications and things like that. And I guess that kind of brings us up to date.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I was a foster parent in my late 20s, and I had 3 teenagers, and I still consider them my children, and I lost one of them to his battle with mental health. And it's such a fascinating thing because everyone immediately wants to say, I'm sorry. And I understand that and I appreciate those thoughts, but all of that has led me exactly to where I am right now, right? And because of the woo woo and the metaphysical, I actually talk more to Eddie than I did when he was an adult in here. And so and he was very, very spiritually minded. But one of the things that happened with him and his group of friends was that they I always say they opened all the boxes. So in my mind, there's a shelf in the back of our head and we have all of the boxes of all the trauma and all of the things. And I think it's a really scary thing to open all the boxes because sometimes they're hard to close again. And that's kind of what happened with him, is that the process that he was in opened all the boxes, and then he couldn't figure out how to get them closed again. So I love when I hear someone like you who not only has gone through your own personal um story with it, but also understands the heaviness of it and the traditional therapy and the metaphysical side of it and all of these things that go into it, because I think that's something that we don't talk about much in our world. Even as you're talking, I'm writing trigger on my page to make sure I put a trigger warning out. But I think it's such an important conversation to have because, as I'm sure you find, when you've experienced suicide in your life in any way or shape or form, people who are also going through the same experience tend to find you. And at least that's in my journey. And so I just love that there's more practitioners out there who are willing to share their own stories and also hold space for those folks who are going through it, whether they're going through it because they're in the process of being um, confined by dark thoughts, or whether they are experiencing the loss of someone they love. um it's a fascinating space in the spiritual world, I think.
Yeah, and it's one of these things where there's more conversation about this. Mental health and suicidal ideation and all that stuff is coming up, and there seems to be a lot more access to resources,
Hmm.
which is great. And the conversation is taking in, how it affects families and communities and workspaces. And it's actually a company that's having me come speak because it affects everybody.
Yeah.
It does. And it's such a big topic and people want to know how to be supportive. It's not the old like rub some dirt on it, drink some water and carry on. Like
Suck
that
it up,
just doesn't
buttercup.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah, suck it up, buttercup. And so, I was thinking about this yesterday because it's kind of just felt or appeared this opportunity in front of me, and thinking about how much I've learned in the last 5 years since doing one of these presentations. And it feels like, and I think this is what you're saying, there's this synthesis happening
Mhm.
where we're bridging siloed modalities. It's not all mental health. It's not all spiritual woo-woo. It's like we are more than one thing. We're all of this stuff.
Mhm.
And so we're synthesizing, we're moving towards synthesization and holistic approaches to these things where we're taking into account more than one thing. Because I don't know if this is even worth going into on the podcast,
But here we go.
but here we go. There were some very dark metaphysical things happening to me during that time that I rarely talk about because I don't think most people would be able to hear it or understand it. But it absolutely factored into what was happening and what actually became part of the healing journey. So I think having practitioners who are open to understanding maybe bigger picture stuff, things that can be unseen or hidden,
Yeah.
and not like just dismissing it outright if somebody comes to you and says, I think there's something affecting me, you know.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting topic that keeps coming up. I personally, in my career, I don't usually interact with that kind of energy. So when somebody comes to me, which they do because of running awkwardly zen, and say, I feel like I have an attachment or I feel like I have something negative that's doing with me, I'm going to instantly send them to somebody who can to do that, because I think it's also important as a practitioner to understand your own limitations and your own desires even, right? Because I don't really want to go down that avenue. And my grandmother, who is right here on the wall, my grandmother guards my DNA. She guards me. And so I'm very blessed with that. I shield, I do all the things, but she also is out there like ready. And I appreciate it. But I have had multiple friends, I've had multiple people through Awkwardly Zen. And so to be able to say, hey, go talk to Ryan and Ryan can help you with this part, or there's Mystic Dave here in town who does a lot of things with the darker side, I guess I would say. I do think that that's really important, and I think that there's so many people who will come to me and say, I know this sounds crazy, but this is what I think is happening. And if you've ever experienced anything metaphysical, I think a lot of times we all feel that way. So to be able to find those spots that will fit someone, I think is so important.
Absolutely. And there's a really great shaman here in Boulder who I've had to go to for some of this sort of help. And I refer people to her because, it's way outside of the scope of what I'm here to do.
Yeah. What's her name?
Her name is BJ.
DJ.
So
Okay.
Wolf Hills, I think is the name of her website, but she's great.
Wolf Hills. I mean, let's name drop. Let's let her get some attention if she's taking clients. Hopefully she is.
I
Um,
think it is, yeah.
and I think that that's so important. It's one of the cornerstones of Awkwardly Zen is the idea of community. Also means within our practitioners that if you're not the right person for someone, let's get them to the right person, because we can't all do everything. And I think that that has been one of the best things about Awkwardly Zen. I love when I'm doing a fair or something and I hear one of our practitioners go, "Oh, you want a medium? Well, that's not me, but let me get you over to Valerie." And to see people get put in front of the person that actually is going to be able to help them, I think is such a powerful thing for sure. Uh, all right, so we went dark. We went dark. Let's go up. Let's lighten up.
All
I'm
right.
all for the darkness. I think it happens all the time, and I think it's good to have these conversations. It's funny because in Awkwardly Zen, we don't tend to in a group setting really delve in. But we have been talking a lot more about having some panel discussions and things about some of these heavier topics because the world's heavy. There's a lot of things going on here. So, as you have utilized gene keys to navigate out of your own traumas and triggers and what do you call them? Core wounds? Is that what it is in gene keys?
Yeah, yeah.
As you've done that, what have been some of your favorite that you're willing to share, favorite kind of aha moments that helped you just lighten the load?
That's a good question. Maybe I'll take a step back and arrive there.
Sure.
So one of the other things I've noticed about the gene keys, and there is, since it's shadow work is a big part of it, there is a lot of this darkness, but it's not necessarily the main focus. And because in the gene keys, each gene key is broken down into um, three frequency bands. So each gene key has three levels. There's a shadow level, which is what we've been talking about, a gift level, which is when the heart opens and we begin to, our unique gifts come online and we begin to serve the whole. And then there's a siddhi, Siddhi. It's a Sanskrit word. And it's sort of like the transcendental aspect that we're evolving toward. And so there's still traces of it in our day-to-day life, but it's a state that maybe we reach in this lifetime, maybe we don't, but we're evolving toward it. And so even from the Gene Keys perspective, it's like, yes, you have to look at the shadow initially to start dismantling, to move through those patterns, but then it helps to train the focus on the higher frequencies because, like what you focus on is what begins to manifest, like it's the cliche glass half empty, glass full kind of thing, like how do you see it? And so, and I've gone through this the other way where I've looked so heavily into the shadow that I feel my attitude starting to sink a little bit because that's all I'm giving my energy to. So it's a good reminder to, yes, look at the dark, but look at the light, have balance with these
Yes,
sort of
love that.
things.
Yeah.
And so the other thing I would say is that transformation takes time. It really does. I mean, some people might have that Uranian lightning bolt tower moment, like crazy, huge flip the script. And like one day is one thing and the next day is a new expression. But for most of us and for most of the transformations, it is indeed the butterfly thing. Most of it is a caterpillar and then some extended cocoon period in the soup and then the butterfly. And that takes time. So as a guide, it's one of these things where people, myself included, often want a quicker fix than that. And so
Yeah.
it's about kind of managing expectations early on that some of these things take time.
Mm-hmm.
So for myself, the Gene Keys, what it has offered for me has been a something that is more obvious zoomed out than like an instant that I can say, oh, well, this happened one day and this happened. What it's done overall in the aggregate is I have just felt my heart open in ways that I've never experienced before. And it's this softening. And in fact, in the Gene Keys, it's talked about how awakening is a series of softenings.
Mm.
Or I've heard it also expressed that enlightenment is behind us, and we just have to slow down enough for it to catch up
Oh,
instead of
interesting.
being something that we're always chasing, you
Okay.
know?
Yeah.
And so that's what it's done for me is it's kind of reorganized my entire approach to life where, I in the military, that's a very young masculine expression, right?
Mhm.
Very even left brain, if you want to think about it like that, like goal oriented, mission oriented. Feelings don't come into play. It's all about accomplish objectives, move, go, do, check box.
Right.
That came out in how I talked to people afterward. I thought I was being efficient, but I was being curt and abrupt and um, and so it's been this kind of rewiring of my own neural pathways into this softness, into the yin aspects. And even in my chart, sort of like the two main themes in my chart are the way of gentleness and the way of surrender. That is the opposite of like what I had been used to in life. So
Right.
the pendulum had swung one way. I'd experienced the full expression of like young masculinity, that sort of driven stuff. And now the universe is asking me to swing the other way to come into balance with allowing life to present itself in its own time. So I feel way more patient. I feel I have this reservoir of self-love that I've never experienced before because before the Gene Keys, I hope this isn't too long of an answer.
No, it's great.
Before, okay, before the Gene Keys, so after getting sober when I came to Colorado and starting to experience the first little fruit of getting better, and it
Mm.
was essentially self-help. The 12 steps were helpful in the beginning. And so I started buying self-help book after self-help book, and my library of self-help and spiritual growth books grew. But I noticed that internally, I wasn't any more satisfied with life. And what I realized years later with the Gene Keys was that each book I would get on self-help would set a goalpost somewhere in the distance. Like when I finish this book, when I finish this practice, I will love myself. And then I get there and another book would come in and then I would just move the goalpost. I love myself when I fix this aspect of me. And I was on this perpetual like fix itness. And that is not the same as radical acceptance. Acceptance is accepting where we're at on the journey, accepting the shadow patterns that are still here, accepting that we're grumpy some days, accepting all of our perceived flaws, that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
I had read, well, same thing. I had read Radical Acceptance. I had done some of the meditations. But I still internally had some sort of discomfort, some shadow stuff that was still there. And it wasn't until working through the Gene Keys programs that I was able to soften enough through the awareness that the Gene Keys provided. Because really that's the main thing they provide, is this heightened sense of awareness. And
Mhm.
so through the awareness, we can see these patterns in a new way. And I realized that I was still approaching everything with this fix-it mindset, this very masculine, goal-oriented mindset. And when I finally perceived that, when I finally had the awareness of what I was doing, it began to shift. Just that little bit of awareness. And then instead of trying to run out and fix or find a way out of some discomfort, I could soften into it and breathe, essentially.
Mm.
And so the Gene Keys got me into deep breathing, and it's actually part of my profile is I have two really big breath keys. And so I had read that years ago, and I was like, what does that mean? I didn't really dive into it because I don't think I was ready for it at the time.
Right.
And then when it was time for this transformation to really take place, I found it was actually so much easier than I thought. And all it really took was creating the space for it to happen. And that required me slowing down, detaching from expectations, and just breathing into my belly, this cauldron of transformation. And life began to transform much more quickly than at any other point in my life prior to that. And, I'm wanting to go like run and shout it from the rooftop, like, it's just the breath. Like all it took was breathing,
That's all you got to
like
do. Yeah.
it's within you.
Mhm.
But I know enough about astrology and cycles and stuff like that that I'm sure everything was right on time. I don't think it could have happened any sooner.
Yeah.
It's about meeting people where they're at and just encouraging this path of acceptance. And
Yeah,
that
I
doesn't,
love that. I love that. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
I don't know.
I was just thinking about how there will be someone who is watching this video and thinking, okay, it's my time. Like this is it, right? And it makes my heart so happy when we find that, because I think about my own journey. And I say this a lot. If you would have told me 5 years ago, Ari, you're gonna make a living as a psychic, I would have been like, sure. But it wasn't time then, right? And so as the path has unfurled in front of me and I take each step, uh it's just a matter of like, okay, well, there's that breadcrumb. Let me go over there. Okay, well, there's that breadcrumb. And so I love listening to you say, I wasn't ready for it then, but here we circled back around and this is where we are. Um, so if you're watching this, you guys, if you're listening to this and it's time, get a hold of Ryan. So Ryan, where can they find you? And we'll put this in the write-up as well.
RyanLanhamCoaching.com.
Okay.
That's my website. There's a contact form there, or you could email me to it, ryanlanhamcoaching@gmail.com. I always love talking to new folks and sort of seeing where they're at on the journey and teasing out what a path forward might look like. It's not a cookie cutter thing.
Right.
And I've also seen some people get into, especially if it's the gene keys they're interested. I've seen some people where they dive in and it, boom, just hooked, dive deep. That's kind of how I was when I went through it. And then other people will read it and go, I don't know if this is resonating with me right now, but it's like a seed that's planted that takes a little bit of time to grow. And then it's like it gains more traction, and then it's something that's part of their life. And then for some people, it just doesn't resonate.
Absolutely.
So there's
Yeah.
my website. And then I also have the meetup group, Gene Keys Community. I don't know the URL. You'll post it.
That's okay. We'll put it in the write-up. And they can also find you on awkwardlyzen.com on the partner
Yeah, yeah.
page.
Yeah,
So
totally.
lots of places to find Ryan. Well, Ryan, I think we could probably talk for another like 4 hours, but any last thoughts that you would like everyone to know about Gene Keys? Anything that you're like, oh, that's just it.
Well, I mean, for me, it's been the biggest transformative experience I've gone through. So it's hard for me sometimes to contain my enthusiasm for it, but I don't want to oversell it like it'll change your life, which is how I feel,
Right.
but it takes time. So for me, it helps to temper the enthusiasm with a reminder for people that it's the long game.
Yeah.
It's not a short, easy fix, but it's beautiful and it's soft and it's gentle.
I think that's so lovely. And I'll go so far as to say that I think most of the spiritual path is the long game. I am a quick answer person. I like things fast. I want to go and have them tell me all the things. And I think that's so helpful. And as a psychic, I know there are times that I've been able to help someone through a moment, but I do look at my own journey and see what I thought was the answer today may not be the answer tomorrow. And so it doesn't mean today's answer is incorrect. It just means that I'm morphing and adjusting and adapting. And so I love the idea of, yes, it's going to change your life, but it's also kind of what you put into it, is what you can get out of things, right?
Yeah, totally.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much for being with us today. Y'all keep watching because I'm sure we'll do some more events with Ryan and maybe some partner events with his group as well. And so it was so lovely to have you on.
Yes, this has been great. Thank you so much.